Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome back to Creation Conversations, where we are missing a Craig, it has to be said. As far as I understand, he forgot that he had a field trip, which is just a terrible thing to forget to do. But he's had to run off and do that. So we were going to obviously deal with Hugh Ross and all that kind of stuff. But since Craig has personal testimony with Hugh Ross and has also gone through a lot of his books, we thought it best to wait until Craig comes back. So that will be pushed into the new year, but that's fine. We'll have plenty to do with that. So this week we're dealing with some evidence news. We're dealing with some Neanderthals. We're dealing with some questions and answers. So get your questions in all the way through this evening. It'll be great to deal with a wide variety of questions. So get them in now and continue to put them in as we go forward. And then next week, we'll have our final creation conversations of the year before we have a Christmas break, which will be dealing with creation, Christmas, Christ, all the connections. So that'll be really great for next week. And we're also, I think it's worth mentioning as well, we're at Standing for Truth coming up as well. But the rest of us are all here. How are we all doing? How's it going on down in Australia at the moment with creation research?
Diane?
Oh, we're doing well, thanks. We're preparing for the Standing for Truth thing on Christmas, which will be interesting. And it is coming up to the holiday season in Australia because it's the middle of summer. So if we go quiet, don't think that we've disappeared or we've forgotten you or we've given up. We haven't. It's the holiday season here starts with Christmas and then goes through January.
It's really true, Diane, because as I think I said last week, Australia is the only country in the world that basically has a holiday for a horse race, as well as turning off from Christmas through to the end of January. Everybody goes to sleep or goes on holidays. It's a national habit, and we can't get out of it. In terms of Diane mentioning summer, it certainly has been hot. I phoned our curator at Jurassic Ark the other day and said, "How are you?" He said, "The humidity is terrible. It's had 25 mils of rain, an inch on the old scale, and everything's wet, but it's so hot, I'm going to have to water anyway." So pray for our curator, Daryl. During summer, it's pretty hard. We take bookings for Jurassic Ark, but we try to discourage people in roughly the middle of January because you actually really do cook up here in Queensland. But we also have our storms, usually in the late afternoon, and we had a massive one overnight on Wednesday, and the result, we got knocked offline. Our national broadcasting network, we rang them up, through if you press on this link, you'll get faster. And 45 minutes, 50 minutes later, we finally got a message through that, help, nothing works. And it's been 2.5 days. And just last night, we finally got a workman out here. So those of you who haven't heard from Australia HQ, apologies. You should see the number of emails sitting there waiting to be dealt with after 2.5 days offline. So we've been trying everything through our phone. Praise the Lord for mobile phones. But I'll tell you what, I find them a real pain to try and type an email or even dictate one, because I don't know who did the voice checker in there, but it doesn't hear what I say and certainly spells some wonderful and strange words that are so unique. I can't figure out what I wanted to say in the first place.
It's your Australian language, John. I keep telling you this. It's
Probably true. Okay, Joe, what have you been doing?
Good stuff. I've been sorting out bins mostly, which has been wonderfully interesting. We're still trying to get all the little things, tweaked with the new museum building. In the new year, we're going to be open every Wednesday and Saturday for sure, and Lord willing, those opening times will increase as we go forward. But it's all so much little tiny things you have to kind of get set up and organised and comply with and stuff. So yes, we very much appreciate your support, because it does mean that we can actually do all the little things like get bins for the building, even in these little things which are all legally required for us to do. But other than that, we've been very busy doing the research, doing the fossil sorting. We've had some great volunteers over the last week. So if you want to volunteer, we're setting up a volunteer network of people who can come and help us at the museum. So the idea is that a joint email will go around and say, right, here's the plan for the next month, right? this is what we need to try and do, this is what we need to try and develop, here's what we need actually done, right? So whether you are able to help with the building works or electrician or any skilled laborers like that, or whether you're good at making models or gluing things back together, or whether you're good with the designing, or if you just want to come and help pack up fossils and catalog things and help shift things and move things about, all these things are much needed. So do get in touch with us for the new year if you're able to come and help and would like to come and volunteer with us. So we've got a great team already, but we can always use more help. So get in touch with that. So it's been mostly organising that and sorting that stuff out this week, as well as sort of preparing for Standing for Truth and getting ready for Creation Conversations and all the rest of stuff as well. So it's been a pretty busy week. How are you doing, Sam?
I'm doing well, thank you very much. Had a busy week at work, which is always good, keeps me entertained during the day. Otherwise I tend to go a little bit stir crazy. But we've got a few initial sort of housekeeping things. This is Q&A, so get your questions in. We will answer the questions live on stream. Just remember to put Q before it so I can see it. That makes it much easier for me to find. And a few other things as well. As mentioned previously, we have the Christmas special with the Creation Research team going on to SFT. The Creator came for Christmas, Jesus in Genesis to Jesus in John. And so that'll be really great fun as well. And also a little plug from me as well. You're probably going to get sick and tired of hearing about it, but we have a brand new website and app coming. So this is really imperative that you get your donations in to help this be possible. This is not a cheap project, and without your support, we can't get there. So if you can donate anything, any little bit helps. It really does. I know these are some trying times, especially with the cost of living crisis in the UK and things like that. But you know, this is for the glory of God's kingdom. Any little bit does help. So I will shut up about that now. I'll probably do something later on, but you never know. But that's me all done.
Sam, I'll throw one thing there. Thank you to those of you in the USA who have told us repeatedly now that you can't make donations. Our website won't accept any money. You can't buy things off the shop. We are aware of this. And you can probably blame Joseph for causing it because he's in England and the website's in America. But in reality, we need a fix. Now, you can still donate, and our donations in the USA are tax deductible, but you'll have to do it via PayPal or PinPay or a direct check to the American office, which is still at the same address. We'd encourage you to do that. That way is still available. And apologies for it, but it's been such a hectic year and such a COVID busy time that we simply are not able to be there and fix it up. But that's all coming, eh, Sam?
Yes, it is. It's all going to be so much easier to donate. It'll just have a one-stop shop for donations for Creation Research and make it so much easier. But in the meantime, if you do wish to donate, you can do so via YouTube through Super Chat, Super Stickers, donations through that. That means you can also go to creationresearch.net, click on shop, and you can donate there. You can also donate on the UK website. And if you donate somewhere, it helps all the Creation Research. It doesn't just help your local branch or arm of Creation Research. So all the money gets shared around equally with everyone. So that's something also to bear in mind whilst we're waiting for a fix.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that, Sam. Busy times, and I think we're all very much looking forward to seeing where God takes us in the new year. Pray that we are allowed back into the States at some point, because it would be great to get over there and sort everything out and really kickstart the ministry, especially now that we've got people like Glenn Wilson working with us. So we've really got some good stuff going. I think I remember, John, if I remember correctly, last time we were there, we ended up getting from Vance Nelson a huge replica of a mosasaur skull. So we've got some pretty amazing fossils and stuff over there as well. So it'd be great to get our museum up and running over there also.
And by the way, just for those who haven't met Glenn yet, Glenn first came to Australia to see us. He was a part of a USA official government tour and got permission to actually take time off and come and see us. He is a doctor of geomorphology, erosional controls, those sort of things. and has provided us with some wonderful stuff, which you'll see a bit of when Diane brings up the report she's going to bring shortly. But pray for Glenn. His aim is to get another Jurassic Ark in Tennessee, and he's sort of got the land, and all those things are coming on. And the big difference between Jurassic Ark and other sort of museums is it's designed so you can actually dig on site. It's designed so you can actually see things and touch things and feel things, the sort of things kids love, and big kids like me especially. You too, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that even though we don't have an on-the-site fossil dig here, obviously research and preparing and gluing and sorting all these fossils out will be a big part of the museum project. But the great thing that we have here is that we live on a relatively small island, certainly compared with Australia, but it means that we're fairly accessible all around the country to get hold of things and do field trips out. In fact, next year, and I think this is the first time I've mentioned this, next year, we are putting together a rather unique field trip. We do lots of field trips in the UK, but we're going to call it the Tights and Mites field trip. And we're going to start here at the museum building, and we have a load of fantastic stalactite and stalagmite specimens. In fact, John, I was just going through our collection the other day. Do you remember that one that you got with Randall when you had to go sort of, chest deep in the water in the caves to pick out?
That's right.
We've just found that. So it's a great example, as well as our giant, 5-foot tall Chinese stalactite. So we start off by looking at some real examples, as well as some examples of modern day tights and mites. Then what we do is we go just down the road to Chirk, and we go to Chirk Canal Tunnel, and we have a look at the stalactites growing in Chirk Canal Tunnel, which we did a whole program about. It's on our YouTube. But then we drive about 30-40 minutes into Wales, and we go to Saigon Copper Mines. And I know I've taken you there as well, John. You've got all of those stalactites in the old copper mines, which are growing over the electrics and wires and stuff. It's a fascinating place, but it should be a really great day field trip. A little bit of traveling, but you get to see some really fantastic examples of stalactites and stalagmites.
Sorry, before you go any further, Joe, just to add something to that Randall Tite you mentioned, Randall stood outside and watched me go sort of chest deep into this freezing water. The Australian, in this, it was actually in an artificial cave dug in a quarry, right? That's the significance of that. And the cave was sort of less than 100 years old. And here is this massive big stalactite. So make sure you get on that trip. And you did mention tights and mites, and I noticed Shogi War has also recommended the brand new updated version. And we will too. And by your trip next year, the tights and mites should be available in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. By this year, they'll certainly be up by early next year. They're due to arrive, as everything's on a go slow with the postal strikes and everything else, and being Christmas. They're due to arrive in the next sort of 4 to 5 days. So they will be available up on the website shortly, certainly in the new year, and they'll be available here in the Creation Research Centre.
Yeah.
So
great. And they are available in Australia, as you see from Shogi War's comments.
Absolutely. Just also another very brief update before we dive into Diane's segment for this evening. I just want to mention that we do have some really exciting things happening on our YouTube channel, not just the app and everything that's going on there, but also come the new year, a few new things will be going up on our YouTube channel. Obviously, we will continue with Creation Conversations every week, but every couple of weeks, we will start putting out episodes of Around the Museum with Diane and Joe. So, Diane, you were here in the UK a little while back, here for our open day, here for our convention in October. So we spent quite a lot of time going around the museum and filming sort of half-an-hour segments, looking at different topics, different aspects of the museum each time. So I really enjoyed doing that with you.
Oh, yes, it was really good fun, and it was really interesting. I'd like to do some more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we sat down and we wrote up about 25 to 30 different topics we could deal with. I think we filmed about 16, 17 of them, which is still quite a lot, but there's still plenty more we could do. And so hopefully next time we'll do some more. But we'll be putting them out every couple of weeks, starting from the new year. So that'll be really exciting. Gives you a nice feel of what the museum what's going on in the museum, as well as the potential of the museum as well. Also, we filmed everything that we did at our convention. So that's 8 programs. I think it is, maybe even more, maybe 10 programs. So including all of the morning devotions. So some of them will be going up on our YouTube site as well. Like there's a fantastic one by Professor Andy McIntosh about science, mathematics, and beauty. There's a couple by you, John, and so on and so forth. Some of them will be going eventually on our streaming site, and then obviously later on the app. And 1 or 2 of them may even have some DVDs available for you to purchase as well. So there'll be plenty of stuff coming up on our YouTube channel. And also, I think it would be really nice, because we are getting ever increasingly closer to a milestone on our YouTube channel in terms of subscribers. I think we're getting closer and closer to 3,000 subscribers. Is that right, Sam? I think that feels like it's the right number.
I have a sneaky suspicion you're right. I'm just double checking.
We're currently, I've got it up here now. We're currently on 2,854 subscribers. So that has increased exponentially over the last few weeks. I can see we've had 37 new subscribers in just the last little while. So that's really quite exciting. So I think as a celebration of reaching our 3,000 mark, we should probably do another Indiana Jones road trip, because I've got a really great idea of what we can do next time, and some great fossils. And you join me out on the field doing some digging and stuff. So I think that would be really exciting to do. So share it around, get people subscribing, get all of your alt accounts subscribing as well, if you've got them. So it'd be great to hit that milestone fairly soon in the new year. But anyway, Diane, how about we go over to you? So to start off tonight, we're going to have Diane giving us a rundown of some of the recent newsletter, because the recent evidence news came out, and I think there's some rather interesting topics to deal with as well.
Yes, we did send out an email newsletter this week. If you're not on that mailing list, the newsletter is free. You just need to sign up on our main website. There's a page where you can sign up for that, and you'll get an email every few weeks. And what we do is we just keep a watching brief on the general science news, the sort of things that's going out to the general public, because we want to help people understand what's being thrown at them in the general science news, and how they can look at it from a biblical point of view, because inevitably everything is put forward as being evidence for evolution or millions of years, or whatever the current cultural issues of the day are. And so we try and help people see, yes, what did they actually find? How can we look at it from a biblical point of view? So we've got 2 stories that related to climate this week, and one about fossils and genetics together. So let's have a look at those.
You've just got your slides up now, yeah?
Go to my slides, yes. Now, let me see if I can find my my screen here. Yes, according to the experts on climate change affects everything. It's even bringing about broiler bears. Now, you might be wondering what a broiler bear is. What it is, it's something we've known about for a while, and my slides don't seem to be forwarding here. Let me see if...
anything working? No. Is it frozen?
It's frozen, has it? No,
try seeing if you can go down to the bottom corner and see if it'll go across that way.
There we go.
We got it.
Right, yes. What's a broiler bear? Well, in fact, it's a hybrid between a brown bear and a polar bear. And these have been known about for quite a while. In fact, we first wrote about them back in about 2006, I think. they're well known in this is well known in zoos. And the interesting thing is the hybrids are fertile. So the hybrids are given all sorts of names. Broiler bears. Another name actually is growler bears, because there is a type of brown bear called a grizzly bear, which is actually a brown bear. It's just some brown bears go rather grey in their old age, just like people. And an old term for going grey is grizzled. So grizzly bears, so growler bears. Or some people want to put the polar bears in front and call them pizzly bears. But either way, brown bears and polar bears are fertile, and the offspring, oh dear, we seem to have frozen again.
Try using your left and right key.
Yes, I'm doing that.
Are you trying on your keyboard itself?
Oh, there we go. Right. It's just being slow this morning. I don't know why, but anyway. So brown bears and polar bears can interbreed, produce fertile offspring, and the hybrids are a sort of varied colour. We need to remember that brown bears are not universally dark. Some of them are quite sort of a light golden brown. So the hybrids are either a light brown or a patchy brown. But they are fertile, and they can go back and breed with brown bears again. So again, you've got this mixing of genes and maintaining of fertility, which should give us a clue about something that we read in the Bible. Now, why is this linked to climate change? Well, these bears are becoming more prominent these days. There are more of them, and the reason for that is that the general geographic range for polar bears and brown bears is actually quite close, and it does overlap. So as the Arctic territories are warming up, the brown bears are moving further and further north, and so there are more opportunities for polar bears and brown bears to meet up. And this has the conservationists and the evolutionists quite worried. Here are a couple of quotes from the Science News report that we reported from. This is from Science Alert. Polar bear numbers are already expected to plummet as sea ice melts. That's a standard story that's being told by the climate change people for quite a long time. If you talk to the people who actually live with the polar bears, they'll tell you that the numbers aren't plummeting. But anyway, let's go on. But experts are now worried that any remaining individuals will see their genetics diluted by hybridization. So we have diluted bears. But what they're really worried about is that they might disappear altogether. Some studies estimate polar bears could be close to extinction by 2100. So if any of you are around then, I don't think I will be, but on this earth anyway, to see that. But you can see whether they're false prophets or not. That does relate to an article that was originally published in Nature. But anyway, save for a few lonely subpopulations in the highest reaches of the Arctic, and if enough of them interbreed with brown bears, the pure species could disappear even sooner. Now, is that really a problem? Well, the bears themselves have proven that this is not actually a problem, because they really are one kind. The fact that they can breed together and have fertile offspring, which can then breed with either the brown bears or with each other and produce successive generations, they are all one kind. The Ursus kind, the technical names for bears are Ursus. Some of you may be familiar with some star constellations called Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. That just means the bear. So what's the problem here? Why can't we just let bears be bears? And so if we can come back to us, if anyone would like to add something before we go on to the next little story.
I've got
I
one
don't
thought,
know, you've been to
particularly,
Canada
Diane.
and those sort of northern areas.
I'll just make one comment here. Having been in the north of Alaska, having interacted
Yes.
with the bears, sometimes been
Mm.
chased by them, otherwise followed their purple poops. Yes, they have purple poops because they largely eat berries in the
Yes.
summer, being vegetarian, and occasionally will eat meat. But in reality, what you'll find is even if you bring the polar bears to a warm country like Australia, and we have this on our website in the Q&A section, you will find that even in the big zoos, the polar bears don't have any trouble dealing with the heat. They have their water there, and the zoos, of course, feed them blocks of ice. Goes with the northern climate mentality, but in the ice are bits of frozen fruit. Now, Diane, do you want to comment on that frozen fruit bit?
Oh, yes, I looked up the website for a place called SeaWorld, which is actually in Queensland on the Gold Coast, so it's quite a warm place, and they have polar bears there. And every now and again you'll see in the news that some company that wants a bit of free publicity donates so many tons of ice to the polar bears. But if you look on their polar bear web pages, where each bear has its name and a little bit about its personality, and one of the things they list is favourite foods, and the favourite foods include things like watermelons, and they do actually deliberately feed them vegetables so that they have a less high-fat diet, because like all mammals, they can vary the amount of subcutaneous fat they have. They can also vary the thickness of their fur, so they can cope with a warm climate quite well. And as you say, all bears like swimming, and polar bears particularly like swimming. And if you notice the name for the scientific name for polar bears, Ursus maritimus, they live on the coast and they like swimming. So not a problem for bears to live in warm climates in those situations, and certainly they're not obligate carnivores. They'll basically eat whatever they can. They're really scavengers, even out in the wild, and in zoos they feed them quite a diet that's quite high in vegetables, and they love it. Favourite food, watermelons. Well, yes.
Diane, what else did we send out?
What else did we send out? Well, we did have another climate story, because in Australia, let's just move on. Oh dear, this has got frozen again, has it?
Are you sure you're on your PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, I'm on my PowerPoint, and no, it's just being slow again.
Just give it a second.
All right. Let me try. No, it's not going to move, is it?
No.
No. All right, perhaps I'll go on with mine, and you can.
You go on, yeah. See if you can get it to work, Diane, and we'll see if.
Can you go off screen? That's good.
Yeah, we're there.
Now, it's been interesting in the last week or so because I had a communication, actual phone call from a school who said they'd lost something. And you think, what's this got to do with creation research? Turns out 30 years ago, we gave them a whole big fossil set, and we gave them a lovely big cabinet, and something had happened as they were shifting it around. Now, Joe, watch out for this in your museum. Some of the labels that I donated to them had actually got lost. Some had been misplaced. And I know even professional museums, this is a nightmare for them, because it's easy to have the specimen, but the label, what do? Glue it on with blue tack? What do? Put it on with super glue? It can be a nightmare. And as we talked, I thought, well, this is great. 30 years after we made a donation, and if you want to know how many fossils we gave, in 1990 prices, it was about $3,000 worth of fossils that we had collected or got specially for them, because we'd been to this school and the kids were interested, but they had no actual objects to actually talk about, no fossils, no. And one of our supporters had deliberately made a beautiful aluminium case for display. eat your heart out, Joe. I know you love one of these big display cases. It was beautifully handmade, etc. And if you wanted to support what we do, this is some of the things that happen behind the scenes, and you don't normally hear again, except for maybe students occasionally. And the question was, can you help us? We've lost some labels. We've got the fossils confused. We want it set up. Great stuff. I said, the only way I can do this is if you send me some pictures. Well, here's what they actually got confused. Can you see that? Now, Joe, this is some of your favorite. It's the kids' favorite when I go to churches. It's a pile of dinosaur poo, right? And they didn't know where the poo was or where one of the agate rocks was. And all of these things had gotten all messed up. They sent me the picture and I said, yes, we found your pile of plop. And there's all sorts of things you can learn from it. You can look at it. You can actually study the food that's in it. You can learn a lot about dinosaur diet. But it was a real encouragement that 30 years after we gave away lots of fossils, the school has still got that display and they still want it to be accurate. And of course, it's designed to show several things. One is the rocks can't be millions of years old because even the dinosaur plop wouldn't be there if it took ages to get buried. Serious. Go and have a look at how long cow plop lasts out there in the field in a normal, nice, moist environment. It doesn't. There's even dung beetles to get rid of it. So it doesn't have too much opportunity. And number two, there's heaps of fossils to prove that things do produce their kind. So thank you very much to that school. Thank you very much to supporters who make this possible. And there's one other question that came in, and that was from somebody who said, why did the guy who recently got his Nobel Prize about doing some genetic studies with Neanderthals, why was such a big fuss made about it? Now, yes, there was a guy who recently got his Nobel Prize, and yes, it was to do with genetics, but it was to do with Neanderthals and us. You see, the guy had been studying the genome, and the little heading of the research article I got them to send me was that we carry fossil DNA. The DNA from Neanderthals is built into us. And as I looked at this, I thought, man, what a twisted way of actually sharing genetics and bits of information, blinded by the theory of evolution, that Neanderthal was separate from us and it evolved into us. But in the evolution, some of his DNA had been trapped and we received it. Now, let's be blunt about some of this stuff here, Diane. You've done a little bit of research on DNA and genomes. In fact, I believe we actually reported some of these studies. So what have you got in your knowledge background there about studying Neanderthal DNA or bits that you find in the DNA?
Well, we do have a couple of items on the fact file about it when this was first brought out. And the evolutionists also are claiming, well, this means that humans and modern humans and Neanderthals interbreed, and they thought that that was very weird. But if you think that Neanderthals and modern humans are actually all of the one kind, there's nothing weird about that. Now, what they found is that all the different ethnic groups all over the world, except for a certain number of sub-Saharan Africans, actually have some gene variants in their genome that are also found in Neanderthals. Now, we need to remember the Neanderthal genes are not whole genes that are unique to Neanderthals that aren't found in human beings. What they are gene variants. So the Neanderthal genome is actually a human genome. It's just that there are some variants in it that are found in some people and some modern people and or living people and some not. So it just reinforces what we've been saying for years and years, well, for decades really, that Neanderthals are just plain people. And there's plenty of evidence for that. And in the general science literature, if you read the professional literature, you get comments like, it's about time we put aside the idea that Neanderthals were some sort of different being. They are just plain people. They're just a variant of human beings. And all the research that's done on them, the modern research about their bone structure, about their the way their bones, their hands worked, about their living spaces. Well, there's also sort of interesting Neanderthal archaeology. Perhaps Joseph can comment about that later. Everything points to them being fully human. And of course, the interesting thing is their brain size. Their average brain size is actually bigger than the modern size. And John, do you have the skulls that?
Yes, I do. Let me show you this one. You see, when I first got into studying Neanderthals, that was the only cast I could buy. It's not an actual skull, and most of us don't have Neanderthal skulls, except in there if you've got a bigger brain case, as Diane was saying. And so this guy was made out to be sort of sloped skull. He was made out to be antique. He was made out to be ape-like in all the diagrams in the textbooks. Now, then I eventually got to the Neanderthal Museum in Neanderthal in Germany, where they'd found the original skeletons. And by then they'd not only measured the brain capacity and discovered, as Diane said, they were much greater, so that this was the skull they were working on, right? This guy here, who basically put a hat on him and he looks like Joe going downtown to Oswestry, right? To set up the museum. Except this guy had more brains than Joseph does, so he probably wouldn't have put a hat on. So you'll find that when you measure the brain capacity, the Neanderthal Museum now has him looking as an upright person, not sloped over, and surprise, surprise, he's got red hair and he's got light-coloured skin and he's got blue eyes. Now, that, of course, is very pro-German, pro-Nordic, pro-Caucasian, but it doesn't matter. They base the data on the materials they could actually get with the DNA in them. So it is interesting. You look at his skull and he provably had more brains than us. But it meant that wherever he came from to get to Germany, Joe, it meant that you've been able, from an old collection, to pick up some evidence that he certainly didn't have to learn how to shape stones. What have you got in your collection?
Yeah, we have a wide variety of Neanderthal artifacts, and we know the Neanderthals because of the location where they've come from. They're from known Neanderthal sites, location sites. So you find tools from there. We've got things like a beautiful little spearhead tool point there. Really quite sophisticated creation, to be honest with you. These things aren't just, knock a few rocks together and hope for the best. They take very, very precise chipping, very precise hitting to be able to nap the flint or nap the jasper, as this is in this case. You can see some really beautiful, if we can try and get it into focus, really beautiful details on the stone tools. So these are all bits of jasper. Really nice flaking there as well. Let's try and get it into focus a little bit. There we are. That's a little bit better. There we go. Really beautiful details on that one. And then we have a huge hand axe here. You can see all that fine edging that they've done, the pressure flaking where they've pressed into it in order to create it. And these things, this is fairly sophisticated technology to be able to produce. And the interesting thing with Neanderthals is that everything we know about them points to them being uniquely human. So it's not just the biology, right? It's not just looking at the skulls and looking at the bones and stuff like that. The fact that they have art, so there are now cave paintings, which are regarded as Neanderthal. So you've got art. We know that they had some form of burial of the dead and burial in the back of the caves and the paintings. So they had forms of religion, forms of burial of the dead. They had creation of tools, as you can see. And all of these things are uniquely human. There are even musical instruments, flutes and stuff, which have been attributed to Neanderthals. So music is also something that is uniquely human. So it's not just in the case of the skulls, and I have my own collection of skulls here in the museum. I think this is the one that you had there, John, a moment ago. So the fact that you've got all of the body morphology, which is uniquely human, the fact that you've also got cultural exhibits, which are also uniquely human, whether that be art, creation and use of tools, a form of religion or a form of society, government rights, and music as well. These are all things which are uniquely human. They are not found in animals, any of them. So you have something which you can only come to the conclusion that it is just purely human, right? And I think the key point which Diane made is really, really important. When they say we've found Neanderthal DNA, they haven't. There is no such thing as a Neanderthal genome. There's a human genome with a Neanderthal variant, and that's a really important distinction to make when we're looking at these Neanderthal people.
In fact, you could probably say that if you regard the Aboriginals as a separate race and the Europeans as a separate race, you could probably put the Neanderthals in a racial group, despite the fact that that's incredibly unpopular. It's the only word that really works. You can't call them a distinct genetic variant. It simply doesn't make much sense. So that's a usable term to describe them, even though it's got all sorts of connotations that are difficult to deal with. What else have we got, Diane? Are you back online yet?
I think so. So do you want to see if you can get...
Yeah, put you back up.
I've got you up on the app. There we are.
Yes.
We can see wettest year since when.
Wettest year since when? Yes, this is another climate story, and the fact is we have had a very wet year in Australia. We've had a couple of very wet years, and of course, all the climate change stories are, this is the wettest year since records began, or we've had a very chilly spring here. Not so chilly up in Queensland, but then it's always hot in Queensland. Although when I was there in what should have been early spring, it wasn't as warm as usual. But anyway, it's been cold and wet in Australia. And recently, the NASA Earth Observatory site, which is always interesting to go and look at, where they have all these lovely satellite photos, published this photo of the southeastern part of Australia, showing the rivers in Australia, how how big they have got from the floods. And I can actually affirm this just from when I returned from England, my previous trip. I flew into Melbourne, which is down at the bottom there, and then flew to Canberra. And so I got a closer look at the ground, and normally you see great brown patches. At that time in Australia, it was November, and you can see the small rivers and streams when you're a bit closer to the ground than this photo was taken. But there was lots of water lying about. The rivers and streams were all wide and full, and it was all green. So certainly southeastern Australia is very green and full of water. And so everyone's running around saying, oh, it's man-made climate change, because all extreme weather events seem to be blamed on man-made climate change these days. But on the ABC News, that's the Australian Broadcasting News, a bit like the BBC, but for Australia, they reported this comment from someone from the SES, that's the State Emergency Service, who of course have been very, very busy with all of these floods. And he said there was a period from about 1949 to about 1956. So early 50s, in which pretty well every river in New South Wales, and those three rivers that we just looked at there, they're all in New South Wales. The Murray River is actually the if we can just go back actually, the Murray River is the borderline between New South Wales and Victoria. And those are the three sort of quite large rivers in Australia. We don't have many really huge rivers like you do in the Northern Hemisphere, but we have some fairly significant ones. Anyway, going back to this man from the SES, pretty well every river in New South Wales had a genuinely big flood, and some of them have records which haven't been beaten since. So when someone says, oh, it's the biggest flood or the wettest year or the coldest year since records began, the question to ask is, well, when did the records begin? And sometimes it's only 50 or 70 or 100 years ago, which is only a fraction of the history of the world. And this is confirmed by a photo that our colleague Glenn Wilson sent to us about flood levels in the Burdekin River. Now, before anyone who knows any Australian geography objects that the Burdekin River is not in New South Wales or Victoria, they are right. The Burdekin River is in North Queensland. But if you go to any country town in Australia that's near a river, there will be some sort of flood level record, something like this. Sometimes it's down near the river, and it'll be just a single pole with marks on it. Now, it's a bit hard to see those individual ones, so I've split up that photo so that we can actually see the dates here. Now, notice how far we're going back. In the left-hand side, we're going back to the early 1950s as the ABC report goes, but some of them are even earlier than that. You can see there 1945, 1972, so those are fairly high. But look on the other side, and there's 1870 is the third one down there, quite high up, and 1946 right up the very top. So what you've got are regular cycles of cold, wet years and or flood years, and that's exactly what we're told was going to happen after Noah's flood. From now on, God told Noah there will be periods of heat and cold, as well as seed time and harvest and day and night. There'll be regular patterns and cycles. And if you ask any of the farmers who keep records on their own property, which they do, you'll get that same sort of pattern. We have another record of this on our Ask site, of just rainfall records that a local farmer sent us on his property. I think it was in Western Queensland. Maybe you can... do you remember, John, where that came from?
It's simply just between here and Toowoomba.
Okay, so it's not
wasn't just a farmer.
Far out. Yes.
He wasn't just a farmer. He was the assistant to our best weather forecaster ever. So he was a highly trained weather recorder, and he kept records we got the records for over 100 years from his farm, and it does exactly the same. Up, down, up, down. So, yes, many records all over the country, but sadly not regarded as official because the Weather Bureau didn't record them because they only started in the 1940s and 50s.
Yes. Well, we need to remember that the farmers are the ones who actually live close to the land. They observe the land and they depend on it for their living. There's a lot of condemnation of farmers these days because of climate change, but in fact, it's farmers who are the real conservationists and the real weather observers. And until we had a lot of these satellite pictures and remote sensing that can be now automated, even the Weather Bureau depended on reports from local farmers. So these sort of records are important and they are valid.
Just quickly, Diane, just before you move on, Sandy has just asked a question. What's the level on 1945?
The one at
1945, it says 14.4 metres.
That's 45 feet.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yes. Australia went metric quite a long time ago, so that they have obviously converted all the original readings. We went metric in the mid 1970s. So all those previous readings would have been in feet, but they've been converted into meters. I grew up with feet and inches, so I'm perfectly happy with them. But a whole generation of people have now grown up not knowing what they are. Anyway, if no one else has anything to add, we'll go on to a completely different topic, which is about the oldest fossil brain. And these days, we can look at fossils with really sophisticated scanning equipment these days and start to see more of the internal soft tissue and internal structures, which is very interesting. And so a group of scientists claim that they found the oldest fossil brain in a creature called a lobopodian, which is dated as being 525 million years old. So that puts it back in the Cambrian period, which is when a whole lot of creatures are meant to have suddenly evolved by some sort of explosion. You've heard of the Cambrian explosion. Anyway, that might be worth talking about some other time. But you might be asking, well, what is a lobopodian? We don't have many of these in the world today. It's an extinct arthropod. It's a sort of long worm-like creature, except that it did seem to have a harder shell or a harder outer casing, and it's an arthropod. And it has a segmented trunk and a whole lot of little short stubby legs. And this is a fossil of one of them. It's not the particular fossil that was studied because we can't show you that on this program because it's published in a fully copyrighted journal. However, now that we've put the story about this on our asks on the fact file site, we do have links to the original scientific news sources. That's the open access scientific news sources like Science Alert, Science Daily, those sorts of things. And because they're journalists, they are given photos by the press releases from the university. So it's worth having a look at those. We've got the links to that on our fact file website. But the interesting thing about this was because they found the brain of this thing, and it looked like it was a well-organized brain, and they could actually see where it was connected to the appendages on the animal's head and also on its to the upper part of its gut. They thought, oh, this is interesting. This seems to be a very well-organized brain, just like modern arthropods have a very small but well-organized brain. And so they decided to do a gene study on how genes develop the brain, the gene expression. And this is the report that we got from the University of Arizona, their press release. And they concluded from their study of gene expression, that is, meaning how genes are activated and how long they're activated for. And they concluded that there was a shared blueprint of brain organization that must have been maintained from the Cambrian until today. Now, remember, they believe the Cambrian is 525 million years. We don't, but the point is they're saying that there is a shared blueprint of brain organization that seems to be the same in this fossil because it seems to have the same organization as modern arthropods of similar structure to this particular creature. And one of the researchers said, well, by comparing known gene expression patterns in living species, we have identified a common signature of all brains and how they are formed. Now, notice the language here. The evolutionists believe that brains and every other body organ, whether it be in an arthropod or a human being, just got here by chance random mutations. But when they describe what they actually found, they can't avoid using the language of design and forward planning. And Frank Hirth went on to say, we realized each brain domain and its corresponding features are specified by the same combination of genes. So they looked at a number of different arthropod species, right? Irrespective of the species we looked at. This suggests a common genetic ground plan for making a brain. Now, again, they cannot avoid the language of plan, purpose, which is the language of design. It's not the language of just chance random processes knocking around. And that makes sense, of course, because genes themselves are information, but the information is useless unless it itself is also organized and planned so that the genes are turned on in the right place at the right time. And you need to remember that all of the cells in your body or in any animal body have the entire genome in them, but most of those genes, of course, are not expressed as cells become specialized for a particular function. So a brain cell will have different genes expressed or active compared with, say, a liver cell or a muscle cell or something like that. So the organization of the genome involves actually a lot more information than what's actually stored in the genes themselves. Now, the organizers are quite small genes, and we're only starting to realize that with all of these genome studies that we're doing now. So the genome revolution has actually been a huge boon to creation rather than to evolution. And if we can just come back to us now, that's I finished with that. If anyone would like to add anything or ask any questions about genomes.
Diane, I'll make a comment if you can put it back on full screen there, Sam.
Yes.
Having seen many of the original fossils, like the ones Diane showed, from the Cambrian or on the edge of the Precambrian over there in Canada, and living in a country which has the velvet worm or Onchipora, a soft-bodied version of what looks like exactly the same thing, I'm personally not surprised that the genome seems to have remained constant, because God says, A, he did design it, and B, as a good designer, it's like the designers of cars. If wheels work, why swap to anything else? Use them on Mercedes, use them on Chevrolets, use them on Fords, even use them on the good old Aussie Holden when it was being made. Wheels work. And so in this creature here, it would seem to go one step further. Not only did the brain get designed, as you saw from the evidence, but the fact is the Peripatus worm, the little Onchipora, the little velvet worm here in Australia, which probably is a soft-bodied version of that, may have gone downhill with its hardness, but at the same time, it definitely seems to have kept the same brain structure, and it's evidence that things do produce after their own kind.
Yes, and the older you want to make it, the longer it's been multiplying after its own kind.
I'll throw in something because somebody else actually brought up in the question time. Have you heard anything of the recent dinosaur discovery? And the answer is yes. I live in Queensland. It was found in Queensland. I used to work out near there, and I've collected thousands of fossils from that area. So pray for Karen as she catalogues and organises our fossils for our museum, and we sort and store them, etc. Just two things. There's the announcement this week. Not the treasure is black gold. That's on how to tack coal out of existence to try it with green programs. As Joe will tell you, they've had to reopen coal mines in England because the green policy simply doesn't work in winter. You can get away with it in summer, but on the other side, you've got this. Okay, the first full, complete plesiosaur type creature, an elasmosaur to be specific, was found here in Queensland by a couple of ladies, and they brought the museum into it. And they even give you a picture, if I can hold up the other side of the Courier Mail, of the thing that really has them excited. The head is still in the right place. Now, if you don't know much about elasmosaurs, and let's be honest, most people haven't bumped into too many elasmosaurs, but when we first bumped into elasmosaurs and plesiosaurs, the interesting thing was the long, skinny neck. So two things come from that. If you find a complete elasmosaur and the head is still where it ought to be attached to the neck, then you should be evident that it was buried quickly. I mean, any creature with a huge long neck, if it's buried slowly, the head is going to fall off, you'll lose some bones, etc. And losing bones is really key because the elasmosaur has anywhere between 52 bones, depending on the species, and 72 bones. Not 76 trombones, but 72 bones, vertebrae in its neck. And the hilarious part of history is we get to see things just one way. So look up some of your books and you find that all vertebrates have necks with only 7 bones in it, is the old sort of common logic out there. So when they first found a elasmosaur or plesiosaurs and its head was over there, it had come off the bones, etc., they would always take it around and put it on the tail, because the tail only had 7 or 8 vertebrae in it. And this happened for skeleton after skeleton until scientists started to say, well, look, this can't be right, because the head is always found at the other end, even if it's not attached. But the beauty of this one is the head was still in position. So you find that it was buried rapidly. So therefore, it's evidence of not only water over there, it's evidence of massive mudslides, massive burial. It's evidence of flood-type deposition. So yes, we have. And if you want to go up that area, it's not actually in central Queensland. More outback would be the right place to put it. It's a place called McKinley, and there's a famous pub out there if you ever want to stop in there. It's used to run by a generator when I used to work out there, so you could get within sort of 20 miles of it and you knew exactly where the pub was. You could hear the generator going at all times. But what is interesting, of course, is that's right on the edge of dinosaur country. So go looking yourself. But these days you need permits from property owners and things like that. And the people who found this really were the property owners, and they just two ladies who love digging fossils, and they really stumbled on a great find. So bless them, but let's hope that people get to hear the whole truth. It is a rapid buried creature. It is preserved intact because it was rapidly buried, and therefore you have to invoke some kind of flood. But because there's at least one other plesiosaur quite a distance away that I've seen, with its flippers right out, with its neck coming out the front, with its tail up the back, there's at least 2 of them that are significantly proof of flood deposition in this area. And don't forget, we mentioned Muttaburrasaurus a few times. I've been out there, met the original finder of it, and it was found in a bed of seashells. So all of that whole area, and most of my fossils for our Queensland Museum here, are actually seashells, marine creatures. Yes, buried with bits of pine and things like that, but nevertheless sea creatures, despite the number of dinosaurs that are found in that bed. Joe, you got any comments to add to that?
No, I think that's covered it pretty clearly, and it's a common trend that you find around the planet in these kind of sediments, is the rapid burial side of things. Before we go on and spend the last sort of hour or so dealing with some questions, John, I know you specifically asked me to go and grab a couple of things from my collection. We've got this thing which is known as a beetroot stone from the UK, and that's Jurassic, and this is known as the Cotham marble, which is Triassic. Also from the UK. What are these things, and why did you make me go and get them?
Okay, they are stromatolites, and the reason I asked you to get them is because dear brother Craig, who forgot last week when he was so keen on saying we're going to have Hugh Ross, and he's had Hugh Ross in his area. He's been to listen to him, he's talked to him, and you can keep looking forward to that program. But when you look at the stromatolites, Craig has quite a lot of these in his museum, right? The museum in Tasmania, go to our website, look up where it is. When you're visiting Tasmania, land in Launceston, Lonnie as the locals call it, named after the Launceston in southern UK, and then drive up half an hour or so and you find a great museum up there, and you'll see stromatolites for yourself. But he has quite a bit of drop-in trade. People who are just wandering along this tourist area and they stumble across a door, see a museum, and they'll wander inside. Well, this last week, he had a professional geologist almost go inside till he saw, it's a creation museum, right? A creation discovery center. And he stopped and he started to sort of back out because, I mean, he was a geologist. The world was millions of years old. And then here's a bunch of creationists with a little museum. And in reality, as Craig and he got to talk, he said, well, the fossils in the oldest rocks prove evolution. And his example was stromatolites. Now, in reality, if you analyze what he said, he really said the oldest rocks, the ones that are 2 to 3 billion years of age, right, supposedly, have stromatolites in them. And because they've been here for 3 billion years, they prove evolution. But in reality, if you analyze what he really said, he just said there's no evidence stromatolites have ever turned into anything else. Can you see how effective this brainwashing is? He's been taught millions of years. He's been taught evolution, and he doesn't even see when the evidence actually shows stromatolites have produced their own kind, no matter how old you think they are. And in fact, the point I love making is if you really think they've been here for 3 billion years, then they ain't got a hope of evolving because they're still the same. They are stuck in the biggest stromatolite rut you could ever imagine. And stromatolite, don't be confused by the big name. It simply means ITE thing, stroma, the old Latin word for layers. So they are a layered thing. And in this case, they're made of lime, which has been laid down by a bacteria in a colony. And so they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And you actually even have things that look like tree rings in them when you cut them. Hold up that big one, Joe, and they can see that again.
Maybe put that on full screen for a second. Hold on.
Yeah.
Mm. Oh, very nice.
Yeah, see that one there? You can see the layers going across as well as the stained material coming down. Okay, Joe, before I disappear here at the moment, can I sneak in a commercial before we take questions, I think? Here we have, and the good news is that's just hit the streets in Australia. It's our first ever Jurassic Ark puzzle book, dinosaur colouring in book, and it's now on the streets for Christmas. So pray for the success of that. Pray it'll be a good blessing to people. And likewise, it's going to be available in the UK along with this one within a week or so, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that one's already available, The What Happened to the Dinosaurs, but the colouring book should be available very, very shortly in the UK. There it is there. Yeah, that'll be available in the next few days. As like I said, everything's on a go slow here. So we're still sort of waiting for it, postal strikes and all the rest of it. But anyway, it will be available very shortly, certainly in the new year. So yeah, we'll keep it coming. Shall we move on to some questions then? In fact, let's start, Sam, with some thank yous, I think, because we've had quite a few thank yous come through tonight.
We've had an inundation of thank yous.
Which is wonderful.
I know.
Wonderful.
Exactly.
And even better, we get to have all of Sam's recreation.
No, I'm not risking anything now because we might get demonetized.
No, don't.
All right, then. Okay, so coming in first, we have Doki Doki with a 5 US Buckaroo, 5 US Buckaroos. Hippo character runs at high speed, his legs forming a ball-like blur.
Come on, Sam, we dare you. Can you illustrate that?
That's all You're only getting the top half, unfortunately, so I can't do the legs. I'm not Wile E. Coyote. We have Michael Hu coming in with 1999 US Buckaroos, Shiba Dog in samurai armor, holding a golden trophy. I'm a huge Japanese nut, so that ticks my box. You get my golden vote of donations for today. Jim P, super sticker, $2.99 Aussie Buckaroos. Thanks, written on top of a purple heart.
Oh, lovely. Yes.
Colour of lavender.
Thanks
there you
from us.
Yes, exactly. We've had Stacey's come in with 1999 US Buckaroos. God bless you, Stacey. Thank you so much. And George Bond as well, coming in with 50 Aussie Buckaroos transferred via bank account towards the Creation Research app. God bless you, George. Much appreciated. And Iron Matt is coming in with a super sticker for 4 US Buckaroos per character, exaggeratedly stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. Where's my... I've drunk all of mine, but there you go.
Yes, we could do with a cup of coffee. It's early morning here in Australia.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're grateful for that.
Exactly. Oh, Doki's coming in again with 3 US Buckaroos, a thumbs up hand gesture with the words top. Cool. I don't know, but there we go. But thank you so much, everyone. God bless you. And just obviously a reminder as well, this is what we are donating towards. If you have just joined us, the new Creation Research app and website is coming soon, but we can only get there with your help. So thank you so much to everyone who has donated so far. It really does help get us there that little bit quicker. So thank you so much for that. Right, okay, let me just take that off the screen, and then we will dive into some questions. Thanks. And someone has joined me for questions. There we go. We've got our lovely Calico Nico. Right, okay. This first one came in from Shogiwa. And it says, question, I've been reading the updated Tights and Mites book. Could you explain/expand on where the word evolution comes from?
Okay, I'll start this, then Joe can go on from it. When we did the Tights and Mites, it was very evident because we were trying to aim at sort of year 10 to year 12 students who will come to Jurassic Ark. They will see the experiments, but many of them, sadly, and this applies to even the professional geologists and teachers, simply don't have the background in knowing what even these words mean. So that when you look at evolution, they think of monkeys turning into man. Now, the word itself, go to its derivation, and I'm sorry for keeping to stress it, but I can't underemphasize, I can't overemphasize it, rather. You need to actually look at Latin and Greek if you want to understand English at all. E meaning out of. E as in exit, right? You go out of. If you look at escape and things like this, the E is a common starting word with many, and you need to check it up. In evolution, you have E, then you have volute, then you have ION. Now, ION is always an ending of a word, and it's to do with something doing something. So it's a state of being, an action or something like that. So you have E meaning out of, and ION meaning a state of being or what it's doing. And volute, well, volute is a shape, as in a shell. Those of you shell collectors will find volute shells. Its original meaning, to go out of, like this. So you're in the state of being, you start there and you get wider and wider circles and you go out. Now, you'll get things like the golden ratio and all of those things come out of this going out of by an evolute. But it really wasn't a biological word to start with. I mean, words only come into existence when you're trying to describe something that is. And if you live in a Europe where nobody believes in evolution, you don't have a word for it, right? I know that because I was asked to preach to a Vietnamese congregation, and I'm starting, no, I don't speak Vietnamese, but I had a translator. And I get sort of halfway through the first sentence, he says, stop, stop, stop. I said, what's the problem? We don't have a word for evolution, right? Because their culture didn't have that concept in it. So when you look at where the English word comes from, it is not biological in origin. The first location I've come across it being referenced to is in a military diary, where the guy in charge says we performed an evolution and went round behind the enemy and got them. So they started here. There's the opposition. So they went around and they evolved to a new position. Now, that's the historical use of the word. So when you go from point A to point B, you have an evolute, right? Now, it's originally military, but it can be used so you can say in the 1800s, a political doctrine evolved into a new one. It went from here and it went over there. Quite legitimate use of the word. But Darwin, of course, has borrowed it and stolen it until you think only in terms of Darwinian evolution. Molecules, cells, finally life multicellular, finally you and I watching this TV show. Now, that is an adaptation of the word, you like that, adaptation of the word, to a biological use only. Now, if evolution happened, that is what it would do. But in reality, that's a nonsense use of it because life does not evolve. It may be naturally selected. It may adapt because of the genes it's already got. But evolution is the one thing it doesn't do, even though we have almost coined the word devolution, right? Going downhill. Joe, you got anything to add to that? And then we'll throw it to Diane.
It's a classic example of a word that used to mean something else legitimate and now means something completely different. Right? Darwin did a very good job of turning a very literal word, a word that can be observed and seen, and turning it into a conceptual word. And so we talk about evolution today as, you not just evolution that we think about, it's in the evolution of creatures, but also like, this is how our museum has evolved over the last year. It still refers to that kind of thinking of change rather than moving round. And you'll find that kind of element of a spiral is still there because you see what is that evidence of present being the key to the past. Like Darwin taking Lyell's ideas of this slow, long, millions of years process and going, well, you can see it happening slowly over millions of years, it revolving and evolving round and round to what we see today. So it's like anything, you have to be careful and ask people when you say these words, what do you actually mean by them? What are you actually, where does this fit in with what you think? So yeah, you've got to be careful with these words because they don't always mean what they used to mean.
Diane, you got anything to add?
Yes, the original book, The Origin of Species, doesn't actually have that word. It does have the word evolve. So evolve is sort of the opposite of revolve. Revolve, you sort of go round in a circle and come back to where you were. Evolve, as John said, you're going out. So you've got that sense of a spiral. And that's the concept that Darwin was applying to his idea of where things came from.
So thank you to the person who asked this. And one of the things we've done with Tights and Mites is actually define all the words as if it's for the first time. So tight, short for stalactite, right? Mite, short for stalagmite. So if you look up the section on the Tights and Mites, you'll find that stalac and stalag also have a meaning, and it's related to water. So stalac actually means to drip, and stalag means dropped, right? Coming from the top, dripped, on the bottom, dropped. So you have stalactites hanging up there, stalagmites are the ones that have dropped down and formed a lump on the bottom, whatever it's situated on. So we try to do that, and we encourage you to learn the words because words matter. I mean, don't be surprised. In the beginning was the Word, and we are made in the image of Jesus Christ, who was the Word. Sin defaced that, so we mess up words as well. We deface words big time, and they always lose their meaning when we do that and make communication harder and harder. So we've tried our best in Tights and Mites, and we'd encourage those of you, particularly in Australia, to actually get the new updated edition. You'll find that very, very helpful indeed. And pray for our museum ministry here in Australia and the UK and in Tasmania, and for Dr. Glenn, isolated all over there in the USA.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, Sam, let's have another question.
All right, then. This one here comes in from Doki Doki. This is to do with our USA arm. Creation Richard, should we ask Logical Plausible Probable if he wants to help with the project since he's also in Tennessee? Any thoughts?
Well, number one, I'd make sure you introduce yourself to Glenn Wilson. If you email me directly, that's at info@creationresearch.net, which is our Australian HQ. Actually, ask, how do I get in touch with Glenn? And we'll introduce the two of you. That's the best way. Glenn is out near, Interstate 111, 112, going from the main Cookville up north towards Jonestown, I think it is, one of those places. But you'll find that he's out there, and he'd probably appreciate lots of help. And yes, so that's probably the easiest way. Email me, and I'll give you names, addresses, and phone numbers, and you'll be able to get in touch. So thanks for the offer. After COVID, for those of you who don't know, one of the first victims of COVID was our secretary, right? So we've been crippled a lot since then. She already had an underlying bad diabetic problem, and before there was any way of treating it, she had passed by, and so had her sister. There's obviously genetic propensities to weakness to many diseases, and so our immediate office and supporters were really, really hamstrung there for a while. So we really need to build up new support base, new administration, etc. So thank you, Doki Doki. Ask me about that when you email me to info@creationresearch.net. That's info@creationresearch.net.
All right, thank you so much for that. Right, next one coming in from George Bond. Question: the latest James Webb Space Telescope images show fully formed galaxies at 13 to 35 billion years away. What are the ramifications for the Big Bang? Also, they detected oxygen, which shouldn't be there in first-generation stars.
Who wants to be first? Joe, I reckon you look like a bit of a star.
Oh, thank you very much. Latest James Webb Fully formed galaxies. What are the ramifications? Well, I think this goes back to what is referred to as the horizon problem, and I think you're probably more qualified to talk about that than me, which is this point that if you have a Big Bang, which is an epicenter that moves out, as we look into the distance, we should find a concentrated mass of both matter and energy. And likewise, if you look the other way, we should see it getting further and further out with this idea that you have a Big Bang epicenter which moves out, right? So 13 to 35 billion light years away. I mean, the universe is also only supposed to be like 14 and a half billion years old. So you've got an issue there as well. But going back to the horizon problem, the problem is no matter how far out you look, you find that matter and energy is evenly distributed throughout the universe. In other words, there simply hasn't been enough time, even in the evolutionary way of thinking, to distribute that amount that evenly. And the fact that we're seeing stuff, was George has pointed out, 35 billion light years away, and the universe is only supposed to be 14 and a half, 15, whatever it is nowadays, billion years. There's a problem there. What it tells you, you can't infer that much in terms of what's actually out there, but what it does tell you is that our standard ideas of light speed and our standard ideas of size of the universe is wrong in some way. So when you say, well, how on earth could, light from 35 billion years away reach us in just 6,000 years, you've got exactly the same problem. Even if you want to make the universe 13 and a half, 14, 15 billion years old, you still don't have enough time. And as I think the current thinking around the horizon issue is that it looks like the universe is getting on for 20 to 30 billion years old, and there's not a single cosmologist who believes that. So there really is a serious issue in the way that we're interpreting things like light speed and stuff like that. It tells you that we need to go back and rethink the way that light behaves and rethink the way that the universe expands. So I think that...
I'll add to that. One of our colleagues who keeps in touch with Barry Setterfield, who's a very provocative thinker in terms of his views on the speed of light, just informed me the other day that Barry's wife is quite ill. So you make sure you pray for her. Barry is still going there. But Barry was one of the ones who we came across many years ago in association with Trevor, whatever his name was, at the University of Adelaide, and coming up with challenges to the orthodox view on the speed of light. And don't be surprised that challenges exist, because if you look up our website on the speed of light, you'll find not just Barry, but you'll find others who say we could solve many cosmological problems if only we'd let go of one thing, that the speed of light is constant, right? So look up speed of light on our creation research Q&A, on our fact file, and you'll find there are quite a few academics who say something's wrong. Professor Ed Nealon drew my attention to the sort of problem Joe's been talking about, and it was really interesting to follow it up. So if you think of the Big Bang, if it happened 13.6 billion years ago, then it should be boom, and things moving out. If the speed of light is constant in 13 billion years, the furthest you could get is 26 billion years light years across in terms of distance if the speed of light has been constant. But of course, you have a tight circle in here. And the fact is, how do you measure the furthest star? You have a concept involving the speed of light. So these are not independent measurements. They're all tied up with each other. But here's the problem. Ed Nealon first brought my attention. He's a professor. He's still amazingly kept his job over these years, despite many academics attacking him as a six-day creationist who believes God created things and there is no evidence they could ever happen any other way. And the evidence points out that they could only happen by somebody intelligently designing all the systems that needed to happen at once. Ed helped Diane and I put together quite a bit of our stuff on the DVDs, Creation, The Facts of Life, on Search for the Origin of Life, all of those things. But when it comes to the astronomy area, he brought my attention to the visually observable universe. And at the moment, the furthest away star, looking with the big telescopes that are now up there, gives you a universe which is at least sort of 45 supposed billion light years across. An absolute impossibility, worse than you could ever hope when they're looking at these edge of the universe, sort of 13.35 billion years, and even the presence of oxygen. George, it's an absolutely unpopular fact that if you've got these constellations and galaxies evolving. For those who don't follow the logic, if you start with hydrogen, then you need an awful lot of complicated, complex, and unbelievable, and I use that word advisedly, unbelievable steps before you can even get to helium. Hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, all the way up the actual periodic table, and then to get to oxygen, and then finally get to uranium. Well, they haven't observed uranium yet, but they know that they shouldn't have even observed oxygen, because these are supposedly there by natural means. And this is the thing that put Ed Nealand off evolution. When you look at what you have to do to make not just the oxygen and the hydrogen, but to actually put them together, so you end up with OH, and then you end up with CCCOH, right? He said it's impossible. This has to be deliberately and intelligently designed in the same way as I put chemicals together to manufacture drugs and things like that, because that's what he's earned his living at for so long. So hopefully that's helpful to you.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, John. All right, let's have some more questions then. We're doing well. We're flying through these tonight.
Yeah, look at that. Right, okay, so this one comes from Jim P. This relates to what Diane was saying earlier. So when was the first polar bear hybrid discovered? Have we ever seen them in the past? Have we ever seen them in the past?
Well, we wrote about it in 2006, but I'm sure it wasn't new then. If hunters and farmers have reported these sort of strangely coloured bears, it was only confirmed in 2006 because somebody actually took samples from it and sequenced the genome. So probably it's been going on for thousands of years, ever since bears left Noah's Ark and migrated all over the world. But we've only got genetic confirmation from it, well, certainly within the last 20 years, simply because that's when the technology's been developed for it.
Okay. One of my friends has been an avid explorer and has been into much of the Arctic. And I was visiting him one day in North America, and he said, have a look at this. Now, I guess there's not too many of you that have actually got close enough to a polar bear's skin to actually see what it's like. You see, when you actually feel the lovely white fur, underneath that is jet black skin, right? So we know they came from the black bears, which are really good at hiding down in the woods. And before Noah's flood, any white bear would have stood out like a sore toe in all the beautiful forests. And even if natural selection had begun before Noah's flood, they would have soon been eliminated. And after Noah's flood, they are sure to be bombed out unless their hair gene that controls color, and Diane can talk about what controls white color in hair, because we humans suffer from this problem a lot too. As you get older, I'm warning you, Joe, watch out, Sam, it's going to sneak up before your hair falls out and it will start to go white. But you see, the polar bear...
John, I'm afraid it's too late for that. I'm the other way around. My hair's already falling out. Look at that.
Oh, right. Yes,
on the top of my head.
Oh, sorry about that, Sam. I'm sorry. We can't even pray for you unless you want money to buy a wig. But don't get the wig option. But Diane, what causes whiteness in even human hair and many animals' hair? Why would they start out black, have jet black skin, but the hair coming from it? And you can see this even in your body hair. Occasionally you get a jet white one. That's not the right word. Jet white
one, right? Yes. White hairs, or what we think of as grey hairs, are simply hairs that have lost their pigment. So, at the base of every hair in the hair follicle, there are pigment-producing cells. As you age, the pigment-producing cells give up before the hair growth cells. So again, that's a loss of a function. And the other thing that happens with the growth of the hair is disrupted so that you get little air bubbles in it. And that results in the hair without pigment and with little air bubbles in it, and it looks white. So if your hair is going like mine, with white patches in it, don't despair. Tell tell people they're not grey-haired, they're polar bear hairs. That sounds much more exotic. But yes, so it's the white hair is simply a loss of pigment and a loss of the growth control in the hair formation to give you little air bubbles in it. Yes.
My suspicion is simply that when you look at the polar bears, they don't live in the Arctic because they're cold. They live there because originally it was the only place they could escape from brown bears eating them, and secondly from Eskimos, Inuits, etc., hunting them. So if you analyze it from Noah's flood onward, God warned Noah after the flood there would be winter, there'd be summer, there'd be cold, there'd be heat, there'd even be snow mentioned later on coming up by the days of Job. So if you are a bear that lives in the post-Noah's flood world, which has water-saturated ground and a fairly good climate for quite a few hundred years, and you devolve from a brown bear that has no trouble hiding in the forest to a white bear that stands out like a here, shoot me sort of target, then you move anywhere you can away from your enemies. You see, vegetarianism was on the decline and God had already authorized us to eat meat. Hey, there's a white bear with a target painted on. Let's go get it, right? They do eat them up there. And what you'll find is they would have moved as far away as they could from any creature that would attack them, humans or other bears. Now, after Noah's flood, you find ice is mentioned in the days of Job. And we know that particularly in the several ice age things that have happened since the flood to the present, the ice was fairly extensive, and no brown bear is going to move to the Arctic, even though it can live off salmon, because at the same time as the white bear can't be seen, the brown bear can on the ice. So there's a very natural separation until you find the ice starts to melt, and then the option comes, the brown bears and white bears begin to overlap like they're doing at the moment. So I suspect this may be the second or third round of actual possible matings, and it's produced something that the media can report on.
Yes, and that's a good example of how survival of the fittest and natural selection are real processes, but they're not producing evolution. All they are is preserving two different populations in two different environments, and when the environment changes, the two different populations re-merge, as it were. So natural selection, survival of the fittest, real processes, but no evolution.
No, good point. Great stuff.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Flying through these questions. Here's an easy one. Question to Joe. Any relation to L. Ron Hubbard?
Probably if you go back far enough.
Yeah, maybe.
You'll find that Hubbard is a very common surname along the east coast of England, basically from Yorkshire down into Norfolk, which is where I originally come from. If anybody knows the old Postman Pat kid stuff from quite a while ago, if I remember Mrs. Hubbard there. And of course the old nursery rhyme Old Mother Hubbard, which my wife was fairly grumpy about having to have a connection with when she married me, but there we are. She's not a mother yet, but I'm sure that'll come one day. But you'll find that it's a very common...
She's not old either.
She's not old, I know, but it's a very common East Coast surname. So I suspect if you go back far enough, there'll be some relation to L. Ron Hubbard, but certainly no connection in the... well, I won't even call it theology in the in the belief system anyway.
Right, okay. We've had a question. Oh no, we've had a super sticker in from Doki Doki coming in with 149 US buckaroos. A pink ice cream cone.
Oh, lovely. I love
Delicious.
ice cream.
It's a shame it's virtual, but there we go. So there we go. Thanks for that one. Neil has come in with a question here. Did animals start eating each other after the fall or after the flood?
Diane?
Well, it does describe the world just before Noah's flood, so that's after the fall but before the flood, as being filled with violence. So that may have involved predation, but it doesn't specifically say so. certainly after the flood, when the environment degenerated enormously, human beings were given specific permission to eat animals. So it's inevitable that people will go out and hunt them. And of course, animals will go out and look for whatever they can get their hands on. Now, or their paws on, or their teeth, or whatever, if the environment degrades so that the plant foods are not as nutritious, animals know when they need protein, and they will go looking for it from some other source if they can't find it from the plants. And some animals are better equipped at eating other animals simply because they already have sharp teeth and claws. You won't develop those things if you're not designed with them to start with. Just starving to death is not going to change your genome. So animals that were well equipped for hunting because of their reflexes and their eyesight, as well as their sharp teeth and claws, were able to survive. So again, survival of the fittest is a true process, but it's not an evolutionary process. Animals are designed to survive, and in the fallen world, which was a world of violence and struggle, that's evolutionary processes are violent, struggle and violence, but they're not going to make anything change from one kind to another. That competitive world that Darwin describes, the war of nature, that's real. So I would say that animals mainly became carnivores after the flood, but the precursors of it were there before the flood, because we are told that the world was full of violence and was degraded and degenerate. Certainly there would have been scavengers before then, because Noah is told there is a difference between clean animals and unclean animals. And unclean animals are basically animals that go scavenging dead things.
Now, I've got one illustration to add to that, Diane. Those of you who've been to my place know I always have two dogs. Now, we had the NBN guy come yesterday, and of course we have a warning up legally about the sort of dogs that we have, because one of them is a huge dog, and I've always usually had one big dog and one little dog. Now, what I've noticed particularly, and I've showed it on this program, and you can probably go back and look at it, my big dog loves to eat chicken food, the grain, right? I can take him, give him a handful of grain, and he'll nibble it, despite the fact he's got huge, sharp teeth, right? And he loves to play with you, but if you end up playing too roughly, he plays roughly back. Now, he doesn't mean to hurt you, but those sharp teeth, even unintentionally, can cause scratches and all sorts of things. But I've also caught my dogs pulling the strawberries off my strawberry plants because they've got space between their sharp teeth, which are excellent rakes. And I found them digging up my potatoes, rotten things, potatoes at X dollars per kilo, right? And they go and dig mine up for free. And so you find that these dogs actually are choice. They are choice vegetarians. They love to eat my fresh veggies. But then I've also noticed one thing. I remember one dear old dog I had it for 13, 14 years. And this dog disappeared. I mean, it was getting old, but it just disappeared. We couldn't find it. And then I discovered that it had died. And the way I discovered it was that its friend and colleague for the previous 10 years had actually found its leg and had brought it home and was eating it up. And you think, would you do that to your best friend? And in reality, the dog was hungry. We hadn't fed it that day. So it went and found the body of the other dog and started chewing it to pieces. And that's a survival of the fittest example. Food is food, no matter what. Now, I hope you don't do that to your relatives or anything. We used to do it called cannibalism, but God expressly forbids this sort of thing. But he did authorize us, and the authorization passed automatically on to the creature world, where we were authorized to eat animals as well as plants. So please don't be a authoritative vegan. God does not authorize you to do that. You're entitled to eat vegans if you like. You're entitled to be a vegetarian if you want, but there is no law that you can impose on others to force them to eat only vegetables. That's a choice that they can make. Joe, you got anything to add to that one?
No, I think you've covered that nicely. I just actually see another quick question that came in just here from Sandy C, which kind of follows off the back of that, and also comes off the back of what we were discussing just before the broadcast. We'd had a question come in, which I think we ought to expand on and deal with, which is along the lines of, how do we know which part of the Old Testament or which parts of the Old Testament to hang on to and which parts are replaced by the New Testament, right? Like, do we still need to create sacrifices, but do we still need to follow laws about tattoos and cooking calves in its mother's blood and so on and so forth? And that has a good, strong connection to Genesis as well, and believing Genesis versus other parts. So off the back of that comes this question, and it kind of connects to the previous question as well, which is, should we be eating unclean animals? John, thought? I know we've dealt with this extensively on the question and answer site, and I think it goes back to that covenant with Noah.
So, Diane, before I answer it, what would they look up if they went to our Q&A site or our fact file related to this issue?
Well, we do have a couple of questions about vegetarianism and veganism, and also the idea that because Adam and Eve were told to only eat plants, should we be eating like that because that's what they ate in the Garden of Eden? It was obviously good for them. That was one of the questions that came in. So if you go to the Ask John Mackay site and just look up vegetarianism or vegetarian, you'll get a number of questions that are related to that.
Right. You'll find it in the New Testament. This is not a new issue that's happened just in 2022. It was an issue for the apostles and the disciples when they went outside of Jerusalem. You see, inside of Israel, they had commonality with what they would eat, except for those wretched Romans who ate whatever they liked, right? But the Jews had a set of laws they'd got from the Old Testament, and these laws had been given to the people of Israel. And if you've never figured out what the purpose of those laws for, it was to make it impossible for an Egyptian to sort of sneak in and have a bad influence on the people of Israel. I mean, if you try and visit a Jewish family today and eat kosher only, you'll find how hard it is. These are barriers to social interaction, and they are very successful. But they also can be very successful dividing you if you insist on vegan diet or you insist on vegetarian diet. They will have exactly the same effect. So this was a problem in the first century when the Christian apostles and disciples moved out of Jerusalem, moved out of Israel, and were taking the gospel to a non-Jewish background world. So they held a conference. You can read about it in the book of Acts on what should we instruct the people out of the law, and particularly the instruction concerning diet. And you'll find this a lovely letter in the book of Acts, and it's recorded in our not only in the Bible but on our website there in the Q&A site, in which they said there's only 2 rules that will pass on because these are rules that God gave Noah. You see, when you look at your Bible's analysis, Genesis 1 to 6 are sort of the Adam to the flood. And then from the flood onwards is the history of the rest of us. You see, everybody disappeared at the flood except for one family. So the rules that God gave Noah are rules that would apply, no, not to the Jews, because they weren't there yet. The Jews weren't there till after Judah. So Judah's descendants, who God is going to specially isolate to keep as a special group for himself, are given a unique set of rules whose job is designed to isolate them until God can use them to bring forth the birth of Christ, which we'll begin to celebrate shortly over Christmas time. But the rules given to Noah was not a Jew. Sorry to upset those of you who are so pro-Jewish you can't see that. Noah wasn't a Jew. Abraham wasn't a Jew, right? I know that's upsetting to some of you, but it simply happens to be true. Noah was told, you can't eat the blood, all right? You can't eat creatures that have already died, right? You can't, there's just a couple of minor rules in there, and they're to do with the blood in the creature, and is related, of course, to the bigger picture. The life is in the blood. So by the time you get to the book of Acts, you'll find that God instructs the apostles to only give them 2 rules, and they're the same rules that were given to Noah. Not the 120,000 rules that the Jews made up by the time they finished the Talmud or any of those, not even the ones that you find recorded in Leviticus, not even the 969 rules you find in the law. there's only 2 rules, and those are the ones that you can insist on, particularly the one, don't eat the blood. And if you're wondering why they can't eat creatures that are strangled, yes, I've had to strangle creatures, and the one thing you find is their blood congeals as soon as you kill it, right? And it will settle in the body. And not only is that a wise precaution because there's lots of diseases in blood, right? But in reality, God gave you a rule and you are wise to keep it. If you can't quite see the connection yet, Joe, I'd suggest we allocate a whole program to this in the new year because it's way beyond just a food rule. It goes through to the sacrifice of Jesus Christ at the Easter time, and we've never dealt with that. And I think it's probably a good idea to do that as a separate program.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really important concept that we need to deal with. So I think we'll, when we're putting together all of our plans for the new year, and we will definitely deal with that one as well. Well, we have about...
So if I can, so one bit there I just didn't notice. Should we be eating unclean animals? Again, if you go back to Noah, the animals had got off the ark, but God didn't say to Noah, now you can eat any animal you like except for the pig. You can eat any animal you like except for the camel that's got cloven feet, right? He didn't add any of those restrictions. They were only rules given to the Jewish people, right? So go by Noah's rules because that's the one the disciples passed on to the Greeks and the Gentiles. And most of us watching today are Gentiles, right? So if you're a Jew, feel free to go and keep all the rules in Leviticus, but you're actually freed from those because of the rules given to Noah, who is your long-term ancestor, whereas Judah is your short-term ancestor.
It's worth pointing out as well, again, that at the time of the flood, there were clean and unclean animals because Noah took 2 of every kind of animal on board, but 7 of every clean animal on board. And of course made sacrifices of the clean animals when he came off of the ark. So the concept of clean and unclean was already there before God gave permission to Noah and all of his descendants to eat all things that move and live. So yeah, really you start with that covenant that God made with Noah and move forward. So that's great. Well, we've got about 15 minutes or so left in questions. So let's dive into 1 or 2 more, Sam.
All right, then. Let's have a look. See, Neil sent a follow-up question after his that said, haven't you got a fossil of a fish regurgitating a smaller fish? Assuming it's a fossil from Noah's flood.
Well, while I run and grab that said fish, John, maybe you'd like to, before we have a close look as to whether it's regurgitating or not, why don't you give people a background to the Green River Formation and whether you think it's a flood deposit or not?
Okay. 2 things. You'll find that in most of the literature, even in the non-Christian, non-creationist literature, they'll occasionally have a picture of a fish and there's a little fish poking out of its mouth. Now, they're then trying to explain this, and some people say, well, okay, you've had a catastrophe of some sort, or it's been swallowed the fish and it died, and sometimes they'll bring up pictures of fish in nets, where you'll find the fish have been hauled in by the fishermen, and as they've been coming up, they took a last-minute opportunity. There's another fish in there that's smaller than me, and they bit into the fish, and by the time they get up to the surface, they can't spit it out. It's actually in their mouth. They're dead, and it's dead as well. So you'll find that when you look at the fishes, they are certainly true. They exist. Fish big one, fish little ones in the mouth. Now, many years ago, I obtained a great specimen, which I can't run out and get to you because it's sort of 6 feet across, 2 meters across, and 1.5 meters high, of a fish that's actually vomited. So the fish has been squashed and the vomit has been forced out of its mouth. Now, this was a clue to me that something was going on here that was absolutely unique. Now, this was a fish that sort of you could see a massive amount of sediment had come in and squashed it. Now, that was what began me checking many locations. I go to Solnhofen, I go to Eichstadt, I go to many of these places, and they also have fishes with vomit. They have fishes with other fishes, and in every case, they actually have lots of sedimentation, whether it's on a small scale or a big scale, because that might be the issue at Green River. There's certainly catastrophe on anywhere from a limited scale to a bigger scale. I have, because our lady comes in and helps us catalogue the fossils, I have a big swathe of crocodile vomit. Now, I'm going to go back to that quarry and look for the rest of the crocodile, because the only way you get crocodile vomit is when it goes, right? It doesn't go too far, but it goes far enough so that the reason it was going is the sediment was coming in and squashing the crocodile. So somewhere over there, maybe a metre or two away, if I can dig through sort of the 6 feet to 8 feet, 2 metres of sediment that's got to be above it, is the rest of the crocodile. And this is definitely an ejectile vomit. And it's a great specimen. And it was buried rapidly too, because vomit doesn't sort of, hey, I'll stay as one single plop. Even in the air, the vomit will disintegrate. In water, it disintegrates and disperses far quicker unless it's rapidly covered. Joe, you got your specimen there?
I have got the specimen there, and just as you were saying, if you look at it, if we go up to full screen, Sam, there we are, get it centered slightly. If you look at it nice and closely, particularly at the, that's actually showing up quite nicely there. If you look at the back of little fish, you can see that there's actually multiple indentations along its back, indicating that big fish has previously come along and munch, swallowed it down, right? In fact, if you look at big fish, just about, let's see if I can move my finger along, just about there, you've actually got part of a vertebrae inside the fish's stomach. So it certainly seems to indicate that little fish has already been previously eaten, and it's the squashing of big fish that actually forces little fish out of its mouth. Because one thing you'll notice is that this fish, although it is technically 3D, as in it is separate to the rest of the material surrounding it, the rest of the matrix, it is completely squashed. It is a flat fish. It's been really forcibly squashed in this sediment, forcing the fish out, but then not having anywhere for that little fish to go, so effectively trapping it in this position in the surrounding matrix, in the surrounding rock, much like John's big vomiting fish. So I'm pretty sure we've dealt with this fish many times on the Standing for Truth website. I'm sure we've got some stuff up on our website as well, so you can go and look it up if you want to find out more information about it. But it's a pretty spectacular fish fossil. And big shout out to the church who actually bought it for us. This was a donation to the museum. So yes, there are plenty of fantastic fossils with wonderful evidence. If you want to purchase some for us or provide the funds so we can get them ourselves, then you know how to do that.
But I have a feeling our next fossil purchase after we find the finances for the app and the website will probably be a full-scale, full real T-Rex skeleton. I can just see it now.
Well, if you have a spare $25 million, then send it our way. I'm not sure that a T-Rex is the most prudent thing to spend on it, but there we are.
It'll bring in the kids.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
All right. This question's just come in from Hola, and they say, thank you so much for joining. Dr. Indiana Joe, not a doctor yet, but working on it. What do you think of the evolutionary explanation that fossils of fish, whales, jellyfish, and octopi are found in mountains or deserts due to plate tectonics?
Okay, so you'll find that you do have things like marine creatures on the top of mountains. We have examples of stuff from the Himalayas, so the highest mountains on Earth. We have the ammonites, the curly-whirly ammonites. And yes, you find whales in the middle of the deserts and so on and so forth. You have to step back and ask yourself for a minute, well, what rock are they actually buried in? And the one thing that you find is that all of these rocks are all marine deposits. They're marine deposits like Jurassic stuff, Jurassic limestone. Some of the whales are in some of the other rock types which would be regarded as Cenozoic. And so you'll find that these are all marine fossils. And you'll find that they're also, as a general trend as well, mixed environments. So, for instance, the ammonites are buried next to fossil wood. Now, that's your first indication that you're looking at something that's actually bigger than just plate tectonics, because the initial rock has to be laid down in a flood. Okay, so you've number one got evidence of a global flood all around the planet, which buries these mixed environments together. Number two, you've then got to get these rocks up on top of the mountains. And plate tectonics is supposed to be a process which takes vast periods of time, millions of years, which slowly raises things out, raises stuff up out of the water, plows in tectonic plates together to produce mountains, and so on and so forth. Yet everything we know about how rocks work says that this didn't happen over slow periods. The fact that you've got bent strata, I mean, the Alps is a classic example where you've got perfectly bent strata. Rocks don't bend when they're solid, right? They crush and produce great big sort of piles of loose rubble. The fact that you've got these mountains which are bent up and are perfectly bent up indicates that the sediment was still actually soft when they collided into each other. And that indicates that it happened a lot faster than over vast periods of time. So if you take a biblical picture, you have a global flood, we call it Noah's flood, and you have a worldwide flood, a global catastrophe, which buried sea creatures and land plants together in sediment that is forming sideways, flowing water, right? And interestingly enough, if you take these strata experiments, and I know that John could comment on this, and you put it in a rotary flume, right? So it's spinning round and round, just like the Earth does, you get all sorts of interesting landscapes just forming from that. But there certainly does seem to be an indication of what are referred to as tectonic continental plates, which have crashed in, like the Alps and the Himalayas. And you have a perfect explanation for this at the end of the flood. So you read it in Genesis. You can also see a parallel in Psalm 104, and it talks about God bringing up the land, sending the water down into the valleys and into the sea. So you've got what we could call tectonic activity, but on a massive scale. And this is going to be happening towards the end of the flood. It's to produce the dry land. The mountains rise up, the valleys sink down, the water flows into the sea. That's what it says in Psalm 104. So you have the perfect scenario to actually create these hills, create these mountains, create this lifting up of the earth, which then puts these sediment, right, full of marine fossils, which were previously under the water, up above the high mountains in a very, very short space of time. John, any comments?
Yes, just a couple of comments. I am blessed by having been given by a collector friend of mine some fossil baby octopuses, right? And they're only sort of that big. And yet when you put them under the microscope, every bit is preserved, including their ink sacs. Now, it comes from the same area where I also have a nice big fossil squid. You've got one too, Joe, right? And what you notice is that the ink sacs are still preserved, whether they're tiny and octopus or whether they're big and whether they're squids, right? And they are also 3D, even though they've been squashed. My little octopi, I can photograph from the side and show just the miniature 3D effect, even though they're squashed. The same is true for the squids. Now, anybody out there, and this is Sam can't hear any of this, but in reality, for $32,000, my friend would like to actually sell me a nice big octopus, right? And of course, this is pre the app. So that's called PA donation. So you go right ahead and send it to Creation Research in Australia. We've got all the ways you can do that. You didn't hear any of that, Sam. But in reality, these are much more 3D. Same as the fish Joe held up. You find even though they're flattened, they are still thicker than 1 or 2 grains of sediment that they're in. In fact, Joe has, if he held up the side of that fish with the other fish in its mouth, you'll see all sorts of laminae. And the thickness of those fish will go 2 or 3 laminae through. So those laminae didn't get deposited in winter and summer. The whole thing is deposited there really quickly, which is a good evidence that this may have been rapidly buried, but it hasn't been messed around by push up, push down, push up, push down all the time, because that messes up fossils as well as the strata. So the best collection of some of these, I've got big fishes from a mountain, and one of them is from Bishop Eusebius, right, in the 2nd, 3rd century. He was the first one who puts on record that up the top here we have evidence of Noah's flood because it stinks of dead fish, right? And up there are massive deposits of fossil fish and sea creatures all buried together. So I'm not impressed by the concept of long, slow uplift, up, down, up, down, up, down over millions of years. It simply doesn't work. It would destroy the fossils and the fossil trees in particular that you see standing upright. All right, Joe, I think our time's just about done.
I think so. Yeah. Have we? How are we doing? I think we've flown through most of the questions there.
Most of the questions have already.
Have we got any last very, very quick question before we finish? And then,
yes, we do. Sandy has written this sort of
yes, that's a good one.
John, are there any good areas for dinosaur finds in New Zealand?
Well, the first debate I had in New Zealand against a professor of geology over there, he said New Zealand is too old to have any dinosaur remains. Now, I wished I could have had another debate with him immediately after they found the dinosaur remains in Hawke's Bay, right? So I sort of grew up with this concept: Australia is too old to have oil. New Zealand too old to have dinosaur fossils, all been eroded away or whatever. Right now, in reality, the dinosaur fossils in New Zealand are on the east coast of the North Island, and you have to sort of go from the coast up towards the beach. There's quite a few gorges, and also we know from history that on the South Island, New Zealand, if you just go north of Christchurch, you find there's a big strip of plesiosaur remains and dinosaur bones, even washing out into the stream beds. So, yes, there's plenty of good dinosaur remains in New Zealand. But when you find one, give us a call. We'll come and help you excavate it carefully over there and report it properly. So yeah, thank you for that. And pray for us with all the dinosaur bones we've got, because it gets a harder and harder legal issue, doesn't it, Joe?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we need to, we keep plodding forward and we keep praying, and the Lord keeps providing. And it's a lot of it is obviously thanks to you guys who support us and donate to us. So keep on supporting, keep on watching Creation Conversations, share it around. It'd be fantastic to get to 3,000 subscribers very shortly, and I'm sure we can do some kind of special celebration when we get there. A reminder, next week we are doing Christmas special broadcast, so the Creator Who Came for Christmas, and we are also doing a Standing for Truth broadcast coming up as well. Where's that?
On the 21st.
On the 21st. I know there's a big graphic for it somewhere, but on the 21st there will be a Standing for Truth program. There it is there. The Creator Came for Christmas, Jesus in Genesis to Jesus in John. We will then be, there we go, John, hold up your books there.
And don't forget that these two are related to the ministry, as well as making great Christmas presents to remind people it's about Christ the Creator who became the Redeemer. So Jurassic Ark dinosaur colouring book and What Happened to the Dinosaurs, you'll find that really, really helpful. Available in both the UK and in Australia. And sooner or later, if we can find some people over there in America to get that all activated for us.
Absolutely. I've got our Christmas broadcast next week, Standing for Truth next week. We're then having a break for at least 2 weeks for Creation Conversations, possibly 3. It depends on what we're doing immediately after Christmas. But Christmas is a time, everything shuts down in Australia. Stuff mostly shuts down in the UK. So it's a time to have a little bit of a break. We may do 1 or 2 little things. But in the new year, we will be starting up with Diane and Joe through the museum. So keep a close eye out for that, as well as some other broadcasts, which will be coming soon. But we'll be back with Creation Conversations early in the new year as we continue forward with our different topics, starting probably with the Hugh Ross program, which was supposed to be today. But continue to pray for us, continue to support us, and continue to like, subscribe, and share. I think that went pretty well tonight.
Yeah,
I think so.
I think that's probably a record for the amount of questions we actually managed to get through.
I think so. We did fantastically. So well done, everybody. God bless. We will see you next week.
Hang on. Wait. Super sticker from Doki Doki, 149 US Buckaroos, a sparkling diamond.
Thank you for that.
Oh, sparkling. Oh, how lovely. Yes.
Diamond.
Just a reminder from me as well, just quickly before we go, get your donations in because we need to get this done. I promise I will tell you what, you see on The Chosen, it says shut Dallas up in terms of, talking about merchandise and things like that. You can shut me up from talking about it all the time if you donate and get it funded. So thank you so much for everyone who has donated already. It really does mean a lot. We've still got a bit of a ways to go, but every little helps. So thank you. God bless. And we will see you next week for our Christmas special.
Absolutely. God
Yes.
bless, and
And
See
you
ya.
too.
see you next time.
Yes. Goodbye.